The Ravens trailed by 4 points with barely 6 minutes left in the final quarter when my daughter-in-law snatched the television remote from my hand. "Go to your room, Mr. Grant," she said without sparing me a glance. "We're watching something else." For a heartbeat, I thought I had misunderstood. The football game disappeared, replaced by a loud home makeover program where strangers debated paint colors as though the world depended on them. I stared at the blank expression on her face. Then I looked toward my son. Ethan stood near the kitchen counter pouring himself a cup of coffee. He had heard every word. His eyes met mine for only a second before dropping to the floor. He stayed silent. That silence hurt more than her insult. Without saying a word, I pushed myself out of my old recliner. My aching knees protested immediately. At 68, arthritis had become an unwelcome companion, but I ignored the pain. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, settled comfortably into the chair I had occupied moments earlier, wrapped herself in a blanket, and continued watching television as though nothing unusual had happened. As though she hadn't just ordered me out of the living room in the very house I had spent nearly 4 decades paying for. I glanced at Ethan one final time. He still refused to look at me. So I walked down the hallway alone. No one stopped me. No one apologized. No one even acknowledged what had happened. Inside my bedroom, I quietly shut the door and lowered myself onto the edge of the bed. The muffled voices from the television drifted through the walls while I rubbed my trembling hands together. They weren't shaking because I was angry. They shook because disappointment weighs more than rage. Growing old teaches you strange lessons. The aching joints, stiff back, and endless bottles of medicine become routine. Those things aren't the hardest part. Feeling invisible is. After my wife Eleanor passed away 4 years earlier, loneliness had settled into every room of the house. Cancer had stolen her far too quickly, leaving behind photographs, memories, and a silence that never truly disappeared. A framed picture rested on my dresser. I picked it up gently. Eleanor smiled back at me from a mountain vacation years earlier. She had laughed at my terrible camping skills during that trip, insisting I couldn't light a grill if my life depended on it. The memory made me smile, only for a moment, because she never would have tolerated what had happened today. She wasn't loud or argumentative. She never needed to be. One disappointed look from her could stop an argument before it began. If Eleanor had been alive, Ethan would have spoken immediately. Vanessa would have handed the remote back. Instead, the house no longer felt like my home. It felt like a place where I needed permission to exist. I opened my bedside drawer and sorted through old papers until I found an anniversary card Eleanor had written years ago. Her elegant handwriting filled the page. At the bottom, she had written one simple sentence: "Never allow anyone to convince you that you matter less than you truly do." I read those words again and again. 20 minutes later, someone knocked softly. "Dad?" Ethan called through the door. "Come in." He entered slowly, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to talk about earlier." I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck before speaking. "Vanessa's been under a lot of stress." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he hadn't apologized, he had explained. "Those are two completely different things." I nodded. "I understand." Relief spread across his face as though he had completed an unpleasant task. "We've been arguing about money," he continued. "She's overwhelmed." I looked directly into his eyes. "Did you come here to explain why she embarrassed me?" He hesitated. "No." "Then why are you here?" He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting peace inside his marriage. Unfortunately, that peace required sacrificing the one person least likely to fight back. That person had become me. After another awkward silence, Ethan quietly left the room. Minutes later, I heard laughter from the living room. Their evening continued, mine did not. Around 10 that night, I stood alone in the kitchen eating a simple turkey sandwich while staring through the window into the backyard. The oak tree still stood proudly. The wooden deck I had built with my own hands remained strong. Everything outside looked exactly as it always had. Only the people inside had changed, or perhaps I had simply stopped pretending not to notice. Before sunrise the next morning, I brewed coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table. Beside my phone rested a business card an old friend had given me nearly 2 weeks earlier. I stared at it for several minutes before finally picking up the phone. A cheerful woman answered. "Good morning. Silver Oak Relocation Services. How may I help you?" I looked around the kitchen that Eleanor and I had remodeled together. Then I quietly replied, "I'd like to schedule a move." The woman asked when. I didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow morning." As I ended the call, my heart pounded. Not because I was afraid of leaving, because, for the first time in months, I had finally made a decision for myself. Upstairs, I heard footsteps crossing the floor. Vanessa was awake. Neither she nor Ethan had the slightest idea that their lives were about to change forever. Looking back, the football game wasn't the beginning. It was only the moment I finally stopped making excuses. 8 months earlier, Ethan had called me one Tuesday evening while I was grilling burgers in the backyard. The weather was unusually warm for early spring, and hearing my son's name on the phone had made me smile. "Dad, can we talk?" he asked. His voice sounded tight. A few minutes later, he explained that overtime hours at the distribution warehouse had been cut. Money was getting tight. Their lease was ending. They needed a place to stay temporarily. "Just a few months," he said. 3, maybe 4. I didn't even let him finish. "Of course you can stay here." The relief in his voice was immediate. Truthfully, after Eleanor died, the house had become painfully quiet. Some nights I turned on the television just to hear another human voice. So when Ethan and Vanessa moved in, the place suddenly felt alive again. There were shoes by the front door, coffee brewing in the mornings, laughter from the kitchen. For a while, I genuinely enjoyed it. The first month passed easily. The second wasn't bad either. Then small things began to change. One Saturday afternoon, I came home from the hardware store and found my recliner shoved into a corner. It had sat near the front window for nearly 15 years. "The room flows better this way," Vanessa said cheerfully. I stood there holding a bag of mulch, staring at the chair. "If you like it," I said. Not worth an argument. A few weeks later, my tools disappeared from their usual shelf in the garage. They weren't stolen, just reorganized. "I made the garage more functional," Vanessa explained. Functional for who? I wondered. But I kept that thought to myself. Then came the boxes. Eleanor's Christmas decorations, family photo albums, her collection of ceramic birds. One day I found them stacked neatly in the basement. "They were making the house feel cluttered," Vanessa said when she caught me looking. "The house. Not your house. Not Harold's house. Just the house." Funny how a single phrase can reveal everything. I kept letting things go because conflict takes energy, and at 68, energy becomes precious. Besides, I told myself she wasn't trying to be cruel. She was younger, stressed, worried about money, trying to build a future. Most of the time, I believed that. Vanessa wasn't a monster. She worked hard, paid bills on time, brought soup to sick neighbors, and helped people shovel snow during winter. But people don't have to be evil to hurt you. Sometimes they simply stop seeing you clearly. Little by little, I became less of a person and more of an obstacle. By June, I noticed another change. Ethan was disappearing emotionally. Every disagreement ended the same way. Dad, it's not a big deal. Dad, just let it go. Dad, Vanessa's stressed. One evening I sat alone in the garage staring at Ethan's old red bicycle hanging from the wall. Suddenly I remembered teaching him to ride it, running behind him down the street while pretending I wasn't terrified he'd crash. That little boy would have defended me. That little boy would have marched into the living room and told anyone disrespecting his father to stop. I missed him more than I realized. Then my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, stopped me at the mailbox. I ran into your daughter-in-law at the grocery store, she said awkwardly. She mentioned you're living with them now. I blinked. She said what? Mrs. Callahan immediately looked uncomfortable. Maybe I misunderstood. She hadn't. 2 days later, I heard Vanessa on the phone saying, "We're helping him out for now." Helping me out. The mortgage had been paid off before she graduated high school. The taxes came from my account. The insurance came from my account. I kept walking and said nothing. Then came the conversation I couldn't forget. Late one evening, I walked downstairs for water and overheard Vanessa speaking on speakerphone. "He can't live alone forever," she said. A pause. "Honestly, assisted living might be better eventually." She didn't sound angry. She sounded practical, as if my future had become a planning discussion that didn't require my participation. That night I barely slept. I kept wondering whether I was becoming difficult, whether age was making me overly sensitive. Disrespect is dangerous because when it happens slowly enough, you begin doubting your own instincts. Then something removed every last doubt. 3 days before the football game, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a marketplace listing. An antique porcelain lamp, blue flowers, hand-painted, Eleanor's lamp, the one her mother had given her. My stomach dropped. I clicked the seller's profile, Vanessa. Then I found another listing, and another. A decorative mirror, a vintage sewing box, an antique side table. All Eleanor's, all for sale, without asking me, without telling me, without permission. For the first time, I wasn't hurt. I was angry. And that anger stayed with me all the way to Sunday afternoon when Vanessa took the remote from my hand and told me to leave my own living room. Because by then, I had already begun asking myself a question I could no longer ignore. Was this house still my home? When I called Silver Oak Relocation Services the morning after the football game, I wasn't acting out of anger. I had spent weeks thinking. The remote had simply been the final reminder that I no longer belonged in my own home. At exactly 9:30 the following morning, a moving truck rolled into the driveway. 3 movers climbed out wearing matching blue shirts. Their supervisor, a friendly man named Curtis, walked over with a clipboard and offered his hand. "You must be Mr. Grant." "That's me." He smiled. "What are we moving today?" I looked toward the front porch, then back at the truck. "My life." He chuckled politely before realizing I wasn't joking. His expression softened. "We'll take good care of it." Ethan and Vanessa had already left for work, believing the day would be completely ordinary. It wasn't. The movers began packing my office first. Photo albums, legal papers, tax records, books Eleanor had loved. I carried what little I could, though my back complained after every trip. Whenever I reached for a heavy box, Curtis gently took it from my hands. "You're paying us for this," he said. I couldn't argue. Around 10:30, they entered the living room. My recliner stood near the window, though not in the place where it had belonged for years. "Taking this?" one mover asked. "Absolutely." As they carried it outside, I expected to feel sadness. Instead, I felt relief. It wasn't just a chair. It held Christmas mornings with Eleanor, football Sundays, late-night conversations, recovery after knee surgery. That recliner had witnessed my life. The next item nearly stopped me in my tracks. Eleanor's cedar chest. It rested at the foot of the bed exactly where she had always kept it. Inside were birthday cards, faded letters, handwritten recipes, vacation photographs, ticket stubs, and dozens of little memories that meant nothing to strangers but everything to me. I rested my hand on the polished wood. For a moment, I could almost smell the lemon oil Eleanor used every spring. "Mr. Grant?" Curtis asked quietly. "You're all right?" I swallowed hard. "I will be." Together they carried the chest outside while I followed slowly. When its lid disappeared into the moving truck, tears filled my eyes. Not because I was losing my past, because I was protecting it. Around noon, I sat on the front steps eating a turkey sandwich while watching the crew dismantle my workbench in the garage. Ethan and I had built it together nearly 20 years earlier. I remembered him as a teenager, laughing every time he bent another nail. Back then, he wanted to spend every Saturday working beside me. The memory hurt. My phone rang. It was my attorney, Rebecca Lawson. "How's everything going?" she asked. "As well as it can." I spoke with the contractor. My stomach tightened. What did he say? He remembered meeting Vanessa about 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks? Before the football game. I slowly stood. What was the meeting about? Rebecca paused. Renovation estimates. I stared across the backyard. What kind of renovations? Her next words landed like a hammer. They wanted estimates for converting your bedroom. I couldn't speak. Into what? I finally whispered. A nursery. The world suddenly became very quiet. I wasn't dead. I wasn't living in a nursing home. I hadn't even moved out. Yet someone had already begun planning a future that didn't include me. Rebecca continued gently. The contractor assumed everyone had agreed. I closed my eyes. Months of confusion suddenly made perfect sense. The furniture moved, the missing keepsakes, the Facebook listings, the comments about assisted living. None of it had been accidental. Someone had been preparing to erase me from the house one room at a time. Harold, I'm here. You're not imagining this, she said firmly. You're not overreacting. Those words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. For months I had questioned my own judgment. Now I know the truth. The movers finished shortly after 3 o'clock. Most of my belongings would stay in storage for a few days before being delivered to a furnished rental Rebecca had helped me arrange. Before leaving, I walked through every room one last time. Without my photographs and furniture, the house looked strangely unfamiliar. The walls where family pictures had hung were lighter than the surrounding paint. The living room echoed. The bedroom felt empty. It finally occurred to me that the movers hadn't emptied the house. They had uncovered it. When I locked the front door behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Everything okay? I stared at the screen before slipping the phone back into my pocket. There was no point answering. Within a few hours, he would walk through that front door, discover that my belongings were gone, and realize that the father he had ignored had finally stopped accepting disrespect. Nothing inside that house would ever be the same again. I was sitting at my longtime friend Daniel Foster's kitchen table when Ethan and Vanessa returned home that evening. I remember the exact time. 5:46 p.m. Daniel had just placed a steaming bowl of homemade chili in front of me when my phone began vibrating across the table. Ethan calling. I watched it ring, then it rang again, and again. Daniel glanced toward the phone before looking back at me. You planning to answer? Not yet. He simply nodded. We have been friends for more than 30 years. He understood that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. The calls kept coming. By 6 o'clock, I had 12 missed calls. By 6:30, there were 18. Finally, a voicemail appeared. I listened. Dad? Ethan sounded confused. Where are you? Why is all your stuff gone? Please call me. His voice wasn't angry, it was frightening. I deleted the message without replying. A few minutes later, another voicemail arrived. This one was from Vanessa. "Harold, please call us. We came home and everything's gone. We don't understand what's happening." Interesting. For months they had barely noticed me sitting in the same house. Now suddenly they couldn't stop looking for me. By 7 o'clock my phone showed 24 missed calls. Daniel slid a basket of warm cornbread across the table. "You should eat." "I'm trying." "No," he replied calmly. "You're worrying." Despite everything, I smiled. He had always known me too well. Just then my phone rang again. "Ethan." This time I answered. "Dad, I'm here." A long silence followed. Finally he asked, "What happened?" "What do you mean?" "Your furniture, your office, everything's gone." "I know." Another pause. "Why?" The question surprised me, not because he asked it, because he genuinely seemed confused, as if Sunday afternoon had never happened, as if the previous 8 months had simply disappeared. I spoke slowly. "Ethan, do you remember the football game?" Silence. Then a quiet answer. "Yes." "Do you remember standing in the kitchen while Vanessa ordered me out of my own living room?" His breathing became heavier. I should have said something. Those 6 words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in months, my son wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming stress. He wasn't defending anyone. He was simply telling the truth. "I know," I replied softly. "We'll talk soon." I ended the call before either of us said anything else. Later that evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, phoned me. "You've caused quite a stir." "I imagine I have," she laughed. "Vanessa made a post online saying her father-in-law suddenly abandoned the family home and removed everything without warning." I rubbed my forehead. "Of course she did." "But here's the interesting part," Mrs. Callahan continued. "The neighbors remembered." She explained that dozens of people had commented beneath the post. Some shared photographs of me building the house decades earlier. Others remembered Eleanor planting flowers in the front yard. Several reminded everyone that I had lived there since before Ethan finished elementary school. No one believed the story that I had abandoned their home, because everyone knew whose home it truly was. "You can't erase 40 years of history with one Facebook post," Mrs. Callahan said. She was right. Reputation isn't built overnight, neither is respect. The following morning, I woke on Daniel's pull-out sofa with an aching back and stiff neck. Age has a way of reminding you that sleeping anywhere except your own bed comes with consequences. While coffee brewed, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Ethan. This one sounded different. "Dad, I found something." I pressed the speaker button. "There are emails." A long pause. "I didn't know Vanessa met with contractors." My heart skipped. "I found renovation plans." He sounded devastated. "They were measuring your bedroom." I closed my eyes. He finally knew. Not because I had told him, because he had seen the evidence himself. For months I had questioned whether I was imagining things. Now Ethan couldn't deny what had been happening. His voice cracked. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Daniel looked at me from across the kitchen. "Everything is all right?" I set my phone on the table. "For the first time in a long while," I answered. "Someone finally sees the truth." 2 days later, Ethan called again. "Dad, will you meet with us?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse. Another part knew that avoiding the conversation forever would solve nothing. "All right," I said at last, "but not at the house." We agreed to meet the following Thursday evening at Mrs. Callahan's home, where everyone could speak honestly on neutral ground. As I ended the call, I looked out Daniel's kitchen window toward the rising sun. The hardest conversation of my life was still ahead of me, but for the first time, I wouldn't be facing it alone. Thursday evening arrived with heavy clouds hanging over the neighborhood as I pulled into Mrs. Callahan's driveway. My hands rested on the steering wheel for a moment before I stepped out of the car. Daniel climbed out behind me. "You ready?" "No," he smiled. "Good, that means you're taking it seriously." Inside the house, the atmosphere was quiet. Mrs. Callahan greeted us warmly before leading everyone into her living room. 7 people sat together. Mrs. Callahan, her husband Walter, my attorney Rebecca Lawson, Daniel, Ethan, Vanessa, and me. No one seemed comfortable. Rebecca opened a neatly organized folder and spoke first. "We're not here to argue, we're here to understand what happened." No one objected. She placed several printed documents on the coffee table. They include contractor estimates, renovation sketches, and email correspondence. Vanessa lowered her eyes. Rebecca continued. "None of these documents are illegal. However, every proposal assumes Mr. Grant would no longer be living in his own home." Silence settled over the room. She slid one drawing toward Ethan. It showed my bedroom redesigned as a nursery. Another blueprint converted my office into a larger walk-in closet. Every plan imagined a future without me. Ethan slowly turned toward his wife. "You told me these were ideas for someday." "They were," Vanessa whispered. "You never told me they involved Dad's room." Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't think—" "No," Ethan interrupted gently. "You didn't." No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The truth spoke loudly enough. Rebecca quietly closed the folder. "I believe the documents explain why Mr. Grant felt unwelcome." Again, no one disagreed. For nearly a minute, the room remained silent. Then Vanessa began crying. Not dramatic sobs, not tears meant to earn sympathy, real tears. Quiet tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I was scared. She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. "When Ethan's hours were cut, I kept thinking we'd never own a home. I became obsessed with security." She looked directly at me. "I stopped seeing you as a person." The room remained still. I started seeing the house instead. Her honesty surprised everyone, especially herself. I took a slow breath before speaking. "Fear explains what happened." She nodded hopefully. "But it doesn't excuse it." Her shoulders dropped. "I know. I spent months wondering whether I was becoming difficult," I continued. "I questioned my memory. I questioned my judgment. I even questioned whether I deserved respect in my own home." She covered her face. "I'm ashamed." "I believe you are." Mrs. Callahan leaned forward. "Harold," she said softly. "Show them." I reached into my jacket pocket and removed an old photograph. The edges were worn from years of handling. I handed it to Ethan. His eyes immediately filled with tears. It showed Eleanor and me standing beside the unfinished house almost 40 years earlier. 8-year-old Ethan stood between us, proudly holding a paintbrush almost as tall as he was. There was dirt instead of grass. Ladders leaned against unfinished walls, but every smile in that picture was real. "I remember that day," Ethan whispered. "So do I." I looked around the room. "Do you know what frightened me the most?" No one answered. "It wasn't losing my house." I looked at my son. "It was losing you." Ethan lowered his head. "I already had." He stood, walked across the room, and wrapped his arms around me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said the words I had needed to hear. "I'm sorry, Dad." I hugged him back, not because everything was fixed, because healing had finally begun. When we sat down again, I looked at both Ethan and Vanessa. "You need to find another place to live." Neither argued, neither protested. "I'll give you 60 days. Vanessa nodded through her tears. "Thank you." Rebecca smiled slightly. "I think that's fair." The meeting ended peacefully. No shouting, no slammed doors. Only difficult truths are finally spoken aloud. 2 months later, Ethan and Vanessa moved into a modest rental across town. It wasn't large, it wasn't luxurious, but it belonged to them. For the first few weeks, my house felt strangely empty. At night, I sometimes wondered whether I had done the right thing. Then I would walk into my living room. My recliner sat exactly where Eleanor and I had always wanted it. Her cedar chest rested beneath the window. Our family photographs once again covered the walls. The house finally felt like home. Ethan didn't disappear from my life. Instead, he started visiting every Saturday morning. Sometimes we repair a leaking faucet. Sometimes we worked in the garden. Sometimes we simply drank coffee on the back porch without saying much. Those quiet mornings slowly rebuilt what months of silence had nearly destroyed. Vanessa came only after several months. She knocked on the front door carrying a homemade apple pie. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I only wanted to apologize one more time." I accepted the pie. "I can't erase what happened," she continued. "I know. But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making better choices." I believed she meant it. Trust wasn't restored in a day. Respect never returns overnight, but people can change when they are willing to face the truth. One Sunday afternoon, nearly a year after the football game, I settled into my recliner to watch the Ravens season opener. The remote rested beside me. Daniel had placed a strip of masking tape across the back weeks earlier. Written in thick black marker were two simple words: Harold's Remote. Every time I saw those words, I smiled. Not because of the remote, because they reminded me of something far more important. A home is never defined by walls, furniture, or ownership papers. A real home is built on love, protected by respect. And the day you stop allowing others to take that respect away is the day you truly come home.